Alrighty. Hi, Dr. Corey. My name is Tyson Upham. I was going to go ahead and present for this part of the PowerPoint presentation for Phase 4. I was assigned both the views of our problem and social justice advocacy as it pertains to interdisciplinary studies and the views of socioeconomic status and race. So to begin, for the views of the problem, what I would like to discuss is, first of all, what is sociology? In its most basic intrinsic form, it's the study of the development, structure, and functioning of human society. However, for a more in-depth kind of understanding, it utilizes the aggregate levels of viewing in order to understand how the individual is affected by societal constructs, structures, institutions, and social cross-generational and or current socio-political and economic ideologies. Being that psychology studies the individual effect of human nature, it is then no surprise that sociology can add to the study of psychology. This is executed through the offering of an intrinsic aggregate look into how society affects the individual. As an interdisciplinary study, there's a symbiotic relationship which occurs between the fields of psychology and sociology. Aggregate studies show how society shapes an individual, and psychology shows how society is affected on the individualistic level. Both studies show relevance, cultural worth, and individualistic intents and motivations behind the theoretical nature of the human affect, which, given its philosophical nature, is something that can neither be deposed nor rejected. The two most prominent what I call the institutional beasts within our society today are healthcare and education. And using sociology, we can determine the discrepancies based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ability and or disability, and age as it pertains to the already socially constructed normative model. Or in that normative model, that's what I like to call the mythical norm, which is basically labeled as a white heterosexual cisgendered male who is Christian and financially stable. The socially constructed normative label has evolved to be the unfortunate status through which others are compared. If individuals do not adhere to the functionality of this label, they are then therefore deemed as a minority. The model used for this social construct was, in fact, created by the vast majority of those who continually have what it is to have access to things that should be equal, inclusive to all institutional forms of protection, health, and wellness for everyone within today's society. So what does this tell us about the discrepancies between race and socioeconomic status as it pertains to healthcare and education? Firstly, I'd like to take a moment to speak about the importance of what we as counselors strive to instill within our clients. This idea is the sole foundation upon which an individual's nature is built. This is known, of course, as the mind, body, and spirit connection. With unequal access to healthcare and education, members of society who are already labeled as a minority with lower socioeconomic statuses are already compromised within the obtaining of balance between this intrinsically prominent connection. And it leads to the compromising of emotional wellness, of mental health, of predisposed genetic conditions, of anything that would particularly pertain to a person's mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. So below what I'm reading here in terms of health and education is a breakdown of the current statistical analysis and disproportion therein, and how this lack of equality further inhibits our clients within the sectors of healthcare and education. So to begin with the first point, healthcare, the first institution of wellness I'd like to examine is the healthcare system. There is a vast disproportionate inequality, which is evident within the research. Not only, or my research rather, not only is this discrepancy apparent within the access to equal opportunity and resources to healthcare as a frequency, we can also see a larger discrepancy between the quality of healthcare given to members of society who are a racial minority and of lower socioeconomic status. Excuse me. According to Welter and Miller, the following statistics show the social inequalities. Minorities actually compose 1/3 of the U.S. population, with Hispanic members of society composing the largest population of racial minorities, followed closely to the African American community. In addition, a projected assessment was created to show the composition of the U.S. population will be comprised solely by minorities in the year 2050. The largest increase will be within the Hispanic communities. And I think it's really important to go back and focus on the current populations, and I certainly appreciated the projection of the populations, which serves as kind of a here and now basis of understanding of how all of these factors that we'll discuss a little bit more regarding healthcare and education will in turn continue to affect large populations of the U.S. After solidifying both the current and projected populations, we are able to gain a broader sense of understanding as it pertains to socioeconomic status. Currently, African American and Hispanics are twice as likely to live in poverty compared to Caucasians and Asians. This was based upon a median household income, which shows an increasing $25,000 deficit, with Caucasians and Asians having access to more levels of financial stability, thus kind of continuing to perpetuate that stereotype of having to be financially stable within that mythical norm. With that being said, we can also examine the medical histories of each race. For instance, African American women are 10 times more likely to have a fatality rate resulting from heart disease and cancers than Caucasians and Asians. The overall life expectancy is also as follows. Caucasians live to be an average of 78 years of age. This is a total of 5.3 years longer than for African Americans in the United States today. And with the United States leading the world in healthcare spending, there still is not a fluid translation into better health or assurances of access to higher quality healthcare for all of its residents. So we can see that with these discrepancies based on socioeconomic status and race, how not everyone is given equal opportunity and access to resources which could otherwise save the lives of many individuals outside of that socially constructed norm that we had discussed earlier in the presentation. And regarding kind of the second institutional beast here, we will discuss education. African Americans and Hispanics have a significantly lower rate of education attainment in the U.S. than compared to Caucasians and Asian communities. Utilizing a mixed population of members aged 25 and older, the following statistics serve as a relevant indication of the social inequalities to gain access to the resources of education. 89% of Caucasians attend and graduate high school, while only 80% of African Americans and 57% of Hispanics are granted the same access. In addition, 45% of African Americans are able to be granted the access to attend and graduate college. Hispanic members of society are only 30% likely to attend college and graduate as well. These large disproportions show not only inequality, but then the aspect of overall quality of life. It also shows us that there is a direct correlation between the comparison of the mythical norm and the likelihood of who we do and who we do not deem as worthy and unworthy of excelling within our culture. So those are kind of the basic views of the problem, where we're seeing kind of these discrepancies in healthcare and education, which are the biggest facets helping all individuals to have access to a better quality of life, and promoting emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical wellness. So as we continue to embark on this journey of trying to mitigate and eradicate some of these discrepancies, we kind of stumble upon the idea of social justice advocacy. So what is social justice advocacy, and what does this mean for us as future counselors? During my research, it was made very apparent that there was a clear delineation and distinction between the word social justice and the word advocacy. In order to have a clearer picture on how we can better serve our populations, embrace cultural relevance and worth, it becomes very necessary to note and examine the differences between this nomenclature. So for instance, social justice in and of itself is inherently defined as justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. Well, then it kind of asks us to understand the implications of what justice is. So it's a concern for the justice, peace, and genuine respect for all people. So we discuss things like inclusivity. We discuss things like acceptance, of love, of identifying cultural relevance and self-worth of all individuals, both on an aggregate level as it pertains to the many facets which are given to us by other cultures and other nations, but also as it pertains to the individual and this idealistic understanding of a person's fullest potential and self-worth. So then we can discuss, excuse me, I apologize. Yes, it's a social justice in and of itself is a social construct created for the betterment of all people, which therein becomes a social phenomenon to protect the matters and affairs of all people from all walks of life and identities, to offer our clients the empowerment they need in order to determine their voice and self-worth, which ultimately leads to their ability to make healthier decisions, regardless of those social justice, or excuse me, the social inequalities which are prevalent. Advocacy, since we're kind of shifting from the idea of what is social justice to what is advocacy, advocacy is the intent, motivation, and active plan that is presented by the counselor and elaborated and established by the client in order to offer places, times, and resources through which clients are able to utilize in order to practice the merit of their own social justice as it pertains to their cultural relevance and considerations. So if we want to talk about social justice is certainly a social phenomenon wherein the practice of advocacy drives it and shapes it. And thus advocacy also continues to propel social justice into motion. One of the many ways which counselors can offer advocacy to clients is through the use of research. And that's my next point here is talking about education and resources. Staying on top of cultural affairs, both domestic and foreign, serves as a pivotal benefit to knowing the extremes of the social disparities and inequalities which affect the lives of our clients, and thus affect the shaping of our society and vice versa. For instance, in my work with the LGBTQIA population, I have both seen and experienced the historical and current implications, those being the inequalities which have faced and continue to oppress our population. So the importance of education and staying on top of certain affairs which affect all of your clients' walks of lives is incredibly important. Nelson Mandela kind of validated that when he said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. The power of education extends beyond the development of skills we need for economic success. It can contribute to nation building and reconciliation. And we'll kind of talk about that nation building and reconciliation towards the end of the conclusion. In addition to research and the assertion of knowledge, we as future counselors are also called to engage within our communities to get a basic ground zero level of understanding the special problems which face our clients in today's society. Knowing which networks are available for socioeconomic assistance, both in the state and federal levels, is beneficial. Knowing the government subsidized resources which are available to clients and knowing the processes through which these resources are enacted helps to offer clients solutions to potential obstacles they may be facing given the societal discrepancies of equal access to healthcare, wellness, and education. Some local institutions include, local and federal institutions here in North Carolina include but are not limited to Planned Parenthood, family medicine, free clinics, the National Institute of Medicine, the public school system, the U.S. Department of Education, and the National Center for Educational Statistics. Regarding the next part is kind of more of a skill building and integrative therapeutic approaches. And kind of regarding skill building and advocacy, I would say that through my experience thus far, that 50% of advocacy is skill building through the therapeutic process. Utilizing skills such as empathetic conjecture, validation, boundary setting, reframing, mirroring, validating, and empathizing, as well as reflecting and summarizing emotion are all veritable skills which can be enacted within the therapeutic relationship in order for the client to find the empowerment needed to create positive change within their lives. I have found also that through the integrated orientation and use of reality therapy, behavioral therapy, and solution-based focused therapy, these skills best serve all populations while still maintaining the sanctity and consideration of cultural relevance and worth. So in my opinion, these three therapies are very multiculturally sound and take into consideration the intrinsic worth of all cultures. In conclusion, I would like to state that it is the independent merit and vocational responsibility of all current and future counselors to continue advocating for social justice for all people. I would like to offer an anecdote about cultural relevance and why it is important to recognize all who offer our society and our world important and worthwhile contributions to our collective, and how the ideology of socially constructive norms continue to combat the need for inclusivity, acceptance, and love. So my employer is a 35-year-old African-American female. She was having a conversation with a close friend of hers who said, "I don't see race." This was in the context of a discussion which was being administered earlier that day. Initially, my employer did not think much of it. In fact, she had not thought about it until the next day when she had mentioned this as we were leaving work that evening. She and I discussed the implications of what it means when someone says that they in fact do not see race. From my employer's perspective, she felt as though by not seeing someone's race, she was being denied the cultural importance of her historical background and the contributions African Americans make within the present culture within the United States. After hearing this, I also became frustrated as I found her point to be not only justified, but authentic, true, honest, genuine, sincere, and powerful. All of these descriptors that I just mentioned fit within the realm and the individualistic bearing of what it means to be a social justice advocate within the counseling industry. As we continue to move forward and lessen the discrepancies of social inequality, we must also have the goal in mind that living in a world where there exists forces greater than us as individuals, we are called to, in fact, eradicate and eliminate the combative powers of inequality and instead replace this facet with love and acceptance. And one of the other things that I had failed to mention earlier when we were discussing kind of therapeutic approaches and skills, is the notion of being able to remain objective, being able to create a safe environment through which clients of all walks of life are able to feel as though they're safe, that they're safe enough to be able to discuss their obstacles as it pertains to their multicultural relevance. And I think that's creating a safe space within the therapeutic relationship, both a physical space as well as a spiritual, philosophical energy caters to that. In addition, being very mindful about your own biases as a counselor, understanding where those biases come from as an individual and how you can further help shape that perspective into a more positive light in order to serve all populations, and not just the ones of which you have no bias. I think we're always called as counselors to continue to reform the way that we think, to continue to remain objective, to continue to tap into our empathy as we struggle to maintain that balance between self-care, our own individualistic relevance, and trying to make sure that we're not working on an empty vessel, with an empty vessel, so that we're able to pour into our clients the acceptance that they need to continue to move forward with the education and resources that we can offer them, both within the therapeutic relationship and within the community. But perfect, yep, and that is all I have in terms of social justice advocacy and the views of the problem using the interdisciplinary study and a symbiotic relationship between sociology and psychology, and how that is relevant within the counseling industry.